Morning, everybody. We're live from the birdhouse, and today we're talking about blackbirds. So the grackles, red-winged blackbirds, starlings usually get lumped into that blackbird category. And I thought I'd throw in sparrows too, because a lot of the things that will detract grackles and starlings will also detract sparrows. So we're going to throw in a side of sparrows as well today. As always, we love to know what kind of things you're seeing. You can throw those in the comments. If you just want to say hi, that's great too. If you have questions, put those in there as well. Spring is in the air, even though we just got another probably inch of snow or so here in Rochester. But the birds are singing every morning. I wake up to the sound of a cardinal singing, so that's a really good sign that spring is here. And the birds are definitely starting to look at nesting cavities. So now's definitely the time to make sure you've got those cavities cleaned out if you haven't cleaned them out yet. Absolutely do that now because the birds are looking for places to nest. Still a little bit early, although bluebirds will start nesting early. House sparrows, which we'll talk about today, they start nesting early, so they will start using and going into nesting cavities soon. So keep that in mind. Love to know what kind of birds you guys are hearing. If you're hearing anything singing, put those in the comments too. And we'll get started here. So today we're talking grackles, blackbirds, starlings, and sparrows too. But first, we have a couple of announcements. So we do have birds of prey here again at the store today. We've had wild wings here a couple of times so far this year. Today, we have birds of prey coming from Braddock Bay Raptor Research. So there will be, I believe, a great horned owl and a red-tailed hawk here from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So you can come in and see those birds of prey up close, and that's always a big hit. So that is today, which is Saturday the 12th. From 11 until 1. So come in and learn all about the different birds of prey. We'll also have Dana Ford doing some programming for us coming up as well. She'll be doing an owl presentation and a presentation on hawk migration. So we have those to look forward to this year. And if you are into birding and bird watching and looking for a place to go, Braddock Bay does have their Hawk Watcher back right now. So the Hawk Watch platform, you can go every day and you can sit there and just see kind of what things are flying over, and that's going on now. And the peak of hawk migration, we're not in it yet, but that'll be not until April or so. They'll have some really big numbers of hawks coming through. And speaking of big numbers of birds coming through, now is definitely snow goose migration time. So and there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of snow geese that are flowing through the Montezuma area. So on Wednesday, there was a huge report of goose activity, and they're estimating there were about 600,000 snow geese out there on that day. So they're still there. And who knows how long they'll be there for. It's not the kind of thing you can wait a week and go next week to probably see them. If you've got the time now to go out there, now is absolutely the time, because nobody's quite sure how long they're going to stay for. So snow goose migration is absolutely happening now in the Montezuma area. So go and check that out. There's different resources. If you are trying to figure out where to go in Montezuma, I will go to their Facebook page, and you know what, I'll share that after the end of this broadcast as well, and they will tell you where they are on different days where you can go and see them. So a lot of snow geese are out there right now. They say there's also a lot of pintail ducks. There's tundra swans out there. And of course, there's Canada geese as well, and even some sandhill cranes. So you can get a nice diversity of birds if you go out into the Montezuma area. So snow goose migration happens every year around this time. And right now it is definitely the time to go check them out. But today we're talking blackbirds, sparrows. So let's start with the house sparrow. So if you've ever put out a bird feeder or a bird house, you may have seen a house sparrow come to it. They are very common. I know that's the thing I have the most in my backyard is going to be house sparrows. So house sparrows are non-native. They were imported to North America in the 1950s for nostalgic reasons and to help control insect populations. When it was realized that house sparrows do not regularly eat insects outside the nesting season, the bird's range had already spread tremendously. So they are an introduced species here in the States. and and they're not protected. So we've talked in the past about how most birds are protected. House sparrows are not one of them. So the three species we have here that are not protected are going to be the house sparrows, the European starlings, which we'll see further on, and then the pigeons or rock doves. Those are not protected. So that means you can remove their nest if their nest is in a place where you don't want it to be. You can remove that nest. You can remove the eggs. You could remove the birds themselves if you so choose to. So these are the house sparrows, male and female. Female's on the left here, and then the male has kind of some more striking coloration. They've got more of a chestnut color on their head and a black throat. So these are your house sparrows. But don't be confused by other sparrows, because they're not all sparrows alike. There's different types of sparrows. If you put out a birdhouse, the house sparrow is going to be the thing you're most likely to get in that box as far as sparrows go. But there are different types that you can see right now at your feeders or underneath your feeders. The tree sparrow is one, and that's the sparrow on the left here. So they're going to be more common in the winter months. So we don't really have them in the summertime, but they're here right now. And they have what's called a bicolored bill. If you look at the bill quite closely, you can see the top of it is black and the bottom of it is yellow. They also have a little dot on their breast there, and they have a chestnut colored cap on the top of their head. So that is going to be your tree sparrow, and you can see those underneath feeders sometimes. Sometimes they'll come to the feeders themselves. Same with the white-throated sparrow here in the middle. As we get further on into spring, they're going to be more common coming to feeders. And then song sparrow. So people are starting to report some song sparrows. We've had some people report those as well. So here's your song sparrow here on the end on the right. So there's a bunch of different types of sparrows. So a sparrow isn't always the same, when we're talking about sparrows in general. There's quite a few different types that we do have around here, but these are some that you might see right now. And red-winged blackbirds. So people are starting to report red-winged blackbirds coming to their feeders. They're coming up from their migration from down south. They're migrating up into our area, and they're hungry. So they're going to be most common at feeders now because they are looking for food. There's not a lot of insect material out right now. So they're coming at feeders in the early spring, especially when we have some snow cover. So I know we've been getting them here at the feeders behind the store. They've been calling. You can hear their little rattly call and their whistles. So look for them at your bird feeders if you are trying to attract them. Because they're a larger, more substantial bird that has some pretty good perching room. So anything that would attract a cardinal will be great for the red-winged blackbird. So a feeder with a tray on it or an open tray feeder on its own is great. The blackbirds will eat black oil sunflower seed. They'll eat millet. They'll eat sunflower hearts. So they'll eat quite a few things. And so if you've got some kind of a feeder out that'll attract cardinals, that's going to be the appropriate size for a red-winged blackbird. Red-winged blackbird, male and female, do look different. The male is on the left here, female is on the right. And so the female almost looks like a giant sparrow. She looks kind of like an overgrown sparrow. But she will have a little bit of yellowish tan kind of coloration on her face, and you might see them in a flock together, both the males and the females. So this red-winged blackbird definitely coming back into town. And another type of blackbird is the oriole. So blackbirds sometimes get a bad rap because of the grackles and things, but keep in mind there's a lot of different types of blackbirds, and one of people's favorite blackbirds to attract to their backyard is the oriole. So they're in that same family. And orioles aren't going to be back yet for a bit. They come back in early May. So even if we have a warm spring, they have a really long migration. They have a long way to travel. They are down south in South America. So they do have quite a long travel time. So even if we are having a nice warm spring, it really doesn't affect the time that they will come back, because they do have that huge distance to travel. So early May is when we're really going to start seeing the orioles. In about a month, we'll start having more classes about orioles and how you can attract them. So every year it's about the same. We put out feeders in late April just to be sure, but we still have some time before we see any kind of oriole activity. And then there's the European starling, and they get kind of grouped into this category of blackbirds, even though they're not related to blackbirds. They're a type of mynah bird. So they're like a mimicking type of bird, another import. So this is another bird that is a non-native species and that isn't protected. So they were first introduced to the U.S. in 1890. Starlings were released in Central Park in hopes that all of the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's works would become established in the New World. And established, they have become. So that is where all of our European starlings came from, is from that little flock that was released in Central Park. So it's kind of amazing that this bird has spread so much just from that release. So European starlings we have all year round. When we're talking about the other blackbirds, the red-winged blackbird, Baltimore orioles, grackles, they're all migratory, but the European starlings we have all year round. And then there's the grackle, and people are starting to report some grackle activity. So they're coming back. They're one of our first birds that we start to see migrating back into the area, the grackles and the red-winged blackbirds both. And people have a love-hate relationship with grackles. It seems like they're a very gorgeous bird. They're a sign of spring, but they can be kind of bullies at feeders. They can go after other birds, and they can eat a lot. And just like those red-winged blackbirds, they are migrating back into the area. They're hungry, and so they'll raid feeders. But there are things you can do to keep them from doing that. We'll go over those. Both the European starling and the house sparrow are cavity nesters. So they will both nest in birdhouses or in a tree cavity. And depending on what kind of house, you might get these kind of birds nesting in it. So if you're trying to attract bluebirds, for example, the bluebirds will fit into a house that has a whole size, a dimension of 1.5 inches in diameter. But the sparrows can fit in that as well. So that can be a struggle for people. If you're trying to attract bluebirds, you might get the house sparrows coming into the house. And then with owl boxes, owl boxes have an opening usually about 3 inches in diameter. And that is large enough, absolutely, for the starlings to fit in. So starlings aren't typically going to be nesting in your backyard houses because they won't fit into something that has a whole size, say bluebird size of 1.5 inches. That's going to be a little too small for them. And unless you get a specialty house like an owl house or a woodpecker house, usually that whole size is going to be pretty small. So usually people don't have many issues with starlings nesting where you don't want them to, unless you're trying screech owls or wood ducks, and they will absolutely use those houses. But the best thing you can do is just clear out that nesting material. If you're trying to attract owls, keep in mind too that screech owls will kick other birds out of that nesting cavity. So if you do have the starlings that are really using that box and they're trying to nest, the owls are known to kick them out. So they will do that. And they're also known to do that with squirrels too. Squirrels will go in owl boxes, usually more in the winter, because in the spring and summer they'll make a nest made of leaves in the trees. That's where they're going to raise their young. So they're really not going to use the cavity so much in the spring and summer. But even if they are, that owl will kick them out if they really want that nesting cavity. And when they're determined to use a nesting cavity, sometimes birds, or it could be the starlings, it could be sparrows, it can be woodpeckers, it can even be squirrels, will try to chew that hole in the house to make it bigger. If that is happening, you can put these little metal portals over the entrance hole, and then they can't do that anymore. So say you have a chickadee house and the sparrow's trying to whittle it and get that hole bigger, you can put a metal portal over it to make that hole smaller. So we have those in different sizes for different birds, and that's one way you can kind of help eliminate some of these birds from nesting in spots you don't want them to. So the hole size definitely matters for the house. And if you're trying to keep sparrows out, getting a house that is made for a chickadee or a wren is going to be your best bet. It's just too small of a hole for the sparrows to fit into. When you're starting to get into houses for nuthatches and titmice that are about 1.25 inches in diameter as far as their opening goes, you're starting to get on that hairy edge there of having a sparrow fit in there. So keep that in mind when you're selecting a box as well. So this is what the nests look like of the house sparrow and the European starling. House sparrows can be a little bit messy with their nest building, and they are kind of creative with the materials, I would say. They'll use a little bit of everything to build their nest: grasses, feathers. Sometimes you can find cellophane in there, plastic. So lots of different materials, and they'll build nests on top of each other too. It looks like there's 2 nests in here. One was built on top of the other. And European starlings will build more of a neat nest. So they kind of weave their nest using a whole bunch of different grasses like this. And so if you have a larger nesting cavity, say a woodpecker house or an owl box, and it has a lot of grasses like this in it woven pretty neatly, that's probably going to be a starling. The wrens will sometimes use those big houses as well, but they're going to tend to use a lot of sticks with their nest building. So keep that in mind too, because woodpeckers and owls, if you're trying to attract them to a nesting cavity, they don't build a nest like these other birds will. They just kind of lay their eggs, just plop them right in on the bottom of the nest box. So that's why a lot of the times nest boxes for the woodpeckers and for the owls, they come with some kind of some like wood chips or something like that. So you can sprinkle that in the bottom of the house to give the eggs some kind of padding. You can do that. You can put dried up leaves in the house. That's fine for them, and they'll lay their eggs right on top of that. But they're not going to build nests. So if you see a nest being built inside your woodpecker or owl house, it's probably going to be from a starling. There are sparrow resistant houses, which we've talked about before. These have a rectangular opening. They have a shallow nesting cavity. So it's not 100% to keep sparrows out, but it's just specs that they don't prefer for their nesting habitat. So they like something that's a little bit more shallow, or something that's a little more deep. They like something with a circular entrance hole, and bluebirds aren't that picky. They'll nest in these just fine. So this is our best-selling house. It's called a sparrow-resistant bluebird house, and that's by far our best-selling house in the store. And it's hit or miss, just like everything else. It's not 100%, but it can absolutely help keep the sparrow activity down in your nest boxes. And then there's something called the sparrow spooker. If you hang shiny reflective tape and you drape that over your bluebird box, once the bluebirds have laid an egg inside of it, that'll help scare the sparrows away too, because they don't like shiny reflective material. So the key to making this work, though, is to wait until the bluebirds have started laying their eggs. They have started to do that. You can put this sparrow spooker, drape it over the house in some way, and the sparrows don't like that shiny reflective tape. So it's another thing you can do. And here's some examples of some I found online. They're not commercially available anywhere that we can buy them from wholesale, so you kind of have to DIY it, but it doesn't have to be anything pretty. Just something that attaches to the back of the house that allows you to drape that reflective tape over the top of the house. And then if you want to put out bird houses but not get the sparrows, wren houses are perfectly fine. They tend to have an opening as far as the diameter goes that's about 1 inch wide. So perfect for them to fit inside, but the sparrows won't be able to fit. Same with chickadee houses. Their entrance hole tends to be like 1.125 inches. And so still small enough that the sparrows can't fit inside. So a couple other things you can do to attract some nesting birds, but keep the sparrows at bay. And then as far as feeders go, this could be a common sight in backyards right now. The grackles will definitely eat a lot. I definitely get a lot of starlings. All of a sudden, there'll be a big flock of starlings. But there's things you can do to discourage them. If you want to still attract some of these blackbirds, but kind of keep them away from your your other birds, you can always have a feeder that's specific for these guys. Something that has a lot of perching room, something with black oil sunflower in it, the sunflower hearts. The grackles and the starlings aren't super picky, sparrows as well, about what they eat. So they'll eat cracked corn, they will eat, of course, the sunflower seed. They'll eat some of the millet as well. So you can have a feeder specific for them kind of off somewhere else, and then have some feeders for the smaller birds in a different area. And that can kind of help keep them from being so nasty to the other birds. And the seed does matter. So if you're getting a lot of blackbirds and sparrows and starlings, keep in mind that because they will eat just about anything, that if you have a seed mix that has a lot of what we kind of consider waste grains in it, a lot of the little yellow seeds in it, you're going to get a lot of blackbirds. They will eat this millet, they'll eat the cracked corn. Some of them will even eat the milo, the little red seed. So putting something out like this isn't going to attract a lot of cardinals or, nuthatches or chickadees. That they'll go for the sunflower seeds, but they don't really like the millet and the cracked corn so much. So the seed can absolutely make a difference. So putting something out with a lot of little yellow stuff in it, that encourages them because they will eat just about anything. So if you're trying to keep them away, even if it's just seasonally, a lot of people will switch to safflower seed. And safflower is a type of seed that they just don't like for some reason. Apparently it has more of a bitter taste and they just don't prefer it. So the starlings won't eat safflower, the grackles, even squirrels don't like it so much. So this time of the year, if you're starting to get a lot of blackbirds really coming in and you're draining your feeders, if you put out safflower seed, they really don't like that. Cardinals love it. Finches love it. I get woodpeckers coming to mind. So it will still get you a diversity of birds, but the blackbirds don't like it so much. So that's something else you can do. A lot of people will switch to this in the summertime and spring for a little bit. And keep in mind too, if you mix this with the seed you're currently using, the birds will tend to just throw the stuff they don't want on the ground and pick out the seeds they want. So we always recommend to, if you put safflower seed out, just do straight safflower, not mixed with anything, because the grackles especially will just throw seed everywhere and grab that little piece of black oil sunflower or cracked corn that they're looking for, and everything else will just go on the ground. So want to keep that in mind. And yeah, a lot of other birds like it. So the cardinals love it. When we start getting rose-breasted grosbeaks in, they love it. So you can still get some pretty colorful birds, but not so much the grackles. Here is an indigo bunting also going after the safflower seed. So it does still attract a good amount of birds, but not those pesky grackles. Another thing to keep in mind is fishing line scares sparrows. People have had good luck with this. If you have sparrows raiding your feeders, you can hang fishing line. If you drape that from your feeders, that can sometimes scare them away. There's something about that fishing line that scares them. There used to be a product called a sparrow halo, which is on the right here. That was kind of a contraption you can attach to your bird feeders, and it just allowed you to drape some fishing line from it. It wasn't anything really fancy, but if you can attach some fishing line to your feeders, that can help scare the sparrows away as well. Something really simple and effective. There's also caged feeders, and this will keep out the starlings especially, and they also keep out squirrels. So most people do buy them to keep out squirrels, but they will keep out the larger starlings. With the caged feeders, they can be they're not everybody's favorite because they'll also keep out larger birds like cardinals too. But if you want something for just small birds, these caged feeders are great. The little goldfinches can pop in and out. Same with chickadees, the downy woodpeckers. If you have the Suet version, they can pop in. So this is really good for smaller birds, but it'll keep out some of those larger birds as well. And then there's always feeders with small perches. So we talk a lot about having feeders with large perches in order to get cardinals. But if you're trying to keep the blackbirds at bay, having feeders with just the little kind of stick perches can help keep them from feeding. It's hard for them to land on those small perches. So if you are trying to attract the smaller birds and you want to keep the grackles elsewhere, you can have feeders with larger perches or a tray type of feeder kind of elsewhere out in your yard, and then have a station with feeders with small perches on it to get those the goldfinches, the nuthatches, chickadees, titmice. They can all land on that just fine. So that's another way you can discourage some of these grackles. We carry a feeder called the Sky Cafe, and which many of you have probably seen, or you might even have. And they have a product that I have found works pretty well with keeping out grackles. It's not 100%, but it's this kind of thing here on the right. If you look at it, there's almost, it looks like a little cage, like little black spikes that are sticking out. It's called a dove guard, and it's designed to keep mourning doves off the feeder. What I found, though, is that it makes it difficult for grackles to feed on, too. They can still perch on it, but they can't really throw the seed off of the feeder. So normally with a feeder like this, they can perch on it just fine, and they'll just scatter seed everywhere. But I have found by using this dove guard here contraption with the Sky Cafe, that keeps them kind of just stuck kind of in a little spot, and they can't throw seed everywhere. So it doesn't keep them off 100%, but it keeps them from making a mess of everything. So I've had good luck with that. And then there's Nyjer feeders. So they don't really like the Nyjer seed. Sparrows will sometimes still come to Nyjer, but the grackles don't like it, and the starlings don't eat it either. So putting out a Nyjer feeder can keep some of these birds at bay, especially if it's an upside down Nyjer feeder. And these are designed in a way where the feeding ports are actually below the perches. So the birds have to flip over upside down to feed from the feeder. And goldfinches can do this just fine. Chickadees can do it. If you are getting red poles, they can do that as well. But it's hard for the sparrows to tip upside down and feed from it. So if you are getting sparrows at your Nyjer feeder, this is one way to keep them at bay. People have had pretty good luck with these. It can take the birds time to learn how to use them, though. That's the feedback that we get with these upside down feeders the most, is that it can just take the birds some time to learn how to actually use them. Same with the upside down suet feeder. Same kind of idea. The woodpeckers, nuthatches, they can cling right into the bottom of this feeder. So the suet is down below, and they can perch right onto it super easily to feed, but birds like the starlings can't, sparrows can't. Every once in a while we hear of one that has learned how to do it. Of course, there's always one, but in general, this will help keep some of these birds out of your suet as well. So as far as keeping some of these birds away, if you're trying to dissuade them from being at your feeders, I would absolutely try safflower. Even if you just try one feeder with safflower, they won't drain it as fast. You can still get some other birds coming to the yard, and not just these flocks of blackbirds. Add some fishing line. If there's a lot of sparrows coming to your feeders, you can add the fishing line. Add upside down feeders, so the birds have to go upside down. And then check your bird houses and see what the dimensions of those houses are, and that can help with some of these issues as well. So those are some of the most common questions we get. Of course, number one's always going to be squirrels. How do we keep squirrels out of feeders? But then right at second is sparrows and grackles and starlings. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, absolutely put them in the comments. Let's see who is on here. Bob says, good morning. Many red-winged blackbirds feeding off the snowy ground today, both males and females. They were feeding along with the starlings, of course. Also, many ST sparrows, song sparrows, and tree sparrows. So he has a whole bunch of different sparrow activities. So not just the house sparrows, but it has a nice little diversity there of sparrows. Randy says, reminder, share Montezuma area. Absolutely. There is the snow goose migration happening right now, and I'll share their page where they have some information about where to go to see that snow goose migration. Here's a picture from previous year of the snow goose migration, which is crazy. Bob says, "Oh, WT sparrows, white-throated sparrows is what he meant here, not ST, but WT, so white-throated sparrows." So he's got a nice little diversity there of the different sparrows, almost all of these guys, the tree sparrow, white-throated sparrow, and song sparrow. So really cool. All of them are here right now in the area. We'll say bye to the tree sparrow, which is on the left here, in about a month or so, I'd say, but they'll be around for a little bit longer. Ronnie says, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Randy says, seen mourning doves, pairs of cardinals, goldfinch 15 minutes ago, and starlings this week. So a bunch of different diversity there, including mourning doves and cardinals. And Karen says, good morning. The red-winged blackbirds were hanging out with the grackles and cardinals this morning. Yep. So you'll see lots of interesting mixed flocks this time of the year. Lots of different activity and lots of different groups coming to feeders. Rosanna says, can't wait to see the Orioles return. Yes, that's always a really exciting time when the Orioles come back into town. So, we still have about a month and a half, but they'll be here. It'll be here soon enough. Chris, good morning, Chris. She says, I'm seeing bluebirds, cardinals, red-bellied woodpecker, red-winged blackbird, starlings, goldfinches, tufted titmouse, chickadees, house finches, house sparrows, and blue jays this morning. The new snow has them eating at the feeders in a frenzy. So keep your feeders full. They are hungry right now. And she's got a really great diversity of birds, including bluebirds. So we've had a lot of people reporting this past week or two about bluebirds looking at nesting cavities. So if you're trying to attract bluebirds, now's the time to think about putting up some houses. And you can definitely put out mealworm feeders as well for them to see if you've got some around. So Chris has a good diversity of birds there. Ronnie has lots of sparrows, chickadees, titmice, woodpeckers, yes, and bullies. Safflower mixed in seed has helped keep the starlings come less frequently. Oh, that's great. So the safflower is working a little bit there for Ronnie. Ed says, earlier this week, we were thrilled to see a red-winged blackbird show up at our feeders. His wing band colors were a little muted. He seemed a little tired, and he took a few minutes to evaluate the feeders, but eventually he flew over and fed for about 15 minutes. He's been back every day, but so far, no females. So Ed had a red-winged blackbird, probably tired from their migration back coming to the feeder. So exciting time of the year. Barb says, I have a pair of bluebirds. All right. So Barb is seeing some bluebirds. Let's see. Grackles says, so excited to learn about feeders. I've been considering getting a few. I live in the Caribbean and buy bird feeders and I live in the Caribbean and bird feeders are hardly sold there. I am considering creating my own, perhaps buy online. Thanks. Of course. Yeah, that would be interesting to know what kind of birds you get down there in the Caribbean coming to feeders. That would be an exciting show all on its own. Mary Lynn says, can you show the pigeon guard again? Yes, absolutely. So this is for the Sky Cafe feeder. This is the guard right here. And like I said, it definitely doesn't keep grackles off of the feeder totally, but it just, if I know when I've watched them in the past at feeders, they'll just kind of perch there and they just like with their beak, just throw things everywhere. So it keeps them from doing that. They kind of have to politely eat and sit at the feeder. Let's see. Greta says, here at home, there are robins, hummingbirds, sparrows, egrets, parrots, so many, still learning the names of the various species. Yeah, I think down in the Caribbean too, you have different types of doves. I think you've got quite a few more dove species than we do. We have the mourning doves here. We have the rock doves or the pigeons here. But in the Caribbean, I believe there's quite a few different species of doves and probably other birds as well. So that's really neat. Bob says, someone asked a little late on last week's stream about the whole direction for birdhouses. Oh, that's a good question. Yes. So if you can, the birds prefer the hole to face east. So when at all possible, that's the best way to go with the whole direction there on different birdhouses. So let's see, I think I can pull up here. what the other directions are in order. They prefer, so first it's east. If you can point the house east, that's preferred. And then in order, it goes north, south, and then west. So somebody studied that, and that's what they found out. So in general, if you can point the house facing east, that is ideal. But the birds will still nest in things that aren't facing that way, but that is just seems to be their preference. Bonnie says lots of nuthatches. All right, Bonnie's getting nuthatches. I actually had a pair of nuthatches in my tree the other day, which kind of surprised me. She says also a Carolina wren and a junco at the Suet. So she's got a whole bunch of different birds as well that haven't been mentioned. Nuthatches, Carolina wren, and a junco. So very, very cool. So it looks like that is everybody's comments and questions. We'll be back on Tuesday with another broadcast where we will share your photos and your sightings. And hopefully you guys get out to see that snow goose migration. It looks awesome. I hope to get out there myself tomorrow. And we'll share your sightings and your reports on Tuesday. And until then, have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.